Hey, Mackenzie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing very well. I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast again. You so far are the first returning speaker
Yeah.
to the podcast, which is very exciting. I think the first time you joined me was the second episode way back when, almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, I
Just
think so.
crazy. So time goes so fast. But here we are again. I'm excited to hear your insight now that you've had more experience with writing and publishing and marketing and the fun journey. Before we dive
Yep.
into that, though, how long have you been writing and publishing?
So I probably started writing in middle school for fun. That's kind of when I started, and then I did it on and off throughout high school. And then in 2020 was when I published my first book and decided to launch myself into being an indie author, and it's just snowballed since then.
So, where are you now? How many books have you published? What types of things do you write?
So I have to date right now, I have 5 books out. I have one ebook coming out soon. I have another novel that I'm hoping that will be published this year. So I have quite a few things coming out, but I mainly write in sci-fi and fantasy, and they're usually like PG-13 style stories.
I love it. I can get behind PG-13. All of my
Yeah.
listeners know that I'm a rated PG adult.
Yeah.
So which I wear proudly. But I just want to talk to you about a little bit about mindset because this is something that you've talked about, and we talked almost 2 years ago. You've learned so much. What have you learned about mindset for you as an author, and remembering the question of why am I writing? How has that helped you?
I think it's helped me to keep more grounded because I think a lot of times what happens is, especially with authors, it's kind of lonely. It's mostly
Hmm.
you in front of your screen or however you write. And I think you just kind of get into this cycle of consistently like, I got to get this workout. I got to make the plan. I have to push all this work out, got to build my backlog, got to build up my audience. And there's so much that goes into it that you kind of hit a point where you don't remember why you started writing, or you come to a point where you don't enjoy writing anymore. And so you kind of like have to refocus and be like, okay, why am I actually doing this? Why do I actually want to share my stories?
And then as you remember the roots of that, I can imagine that, some of the harder things, the more stressful, challenging things, they don't fall away. I think they're kind of always at the back of your mind,
Yeah.
but suddenly they don't feel so big, right? Because you're like, oh, that's right. When I get down to the bare bones of it, the experience is still fun. It's still the reason I come. So for you specifically, thinking about the beginning, why you started writing versus now, has it changed or is it the same? The reasons why you write?
I think why I write hasn't quite changed. I know when I first started, I was like, I just want to share my stories. And it was like, I don't care what those stories look like. I just want to share them. But as I've kind of grown and I've written more stuff, it's kind of changed. It's like, oh, I kind of want to push myself to see, oh, can I write this style of story, or can I write in this perspective? And just kind of a challenge, but also kind of connecting more, that it's like, I want my stories to resonate with people. How could I get that connection?
No, I think that's amazing. Connecting with readers, I think, is challenging, right? Especially if you don't
Yeah.
know specifically who your readers are. That's a completely different conversation. But sometimes it's hard to remember that piece of it when you're inundated with a bunch of things. So knowing that, your reasons hasn't changed that much, how in the moment when you're stressed, how do you come back to that? How do you remember to come back to that to kind of help alleviate the stress of everything else?
I think the big thing for me is I think when I get so stressed out about it, I just kind of have to take a step back and I have to look at, it's like, do I want to get this story finished just to get it finished, or do I want to actually enjoy it along the way, because I'm very much a discovery writer. Like I have
Mm.
a plan on, like I kind of have a plan on where I'm going, but I like to discover little things along the way. And I've had stuff come up in when I'm writing that I get excited about, because it's like I don't know where this came from, but this is so exciting. And I notice a lot of times that when I'm getting really stressed out about where I'm at as an author, or where my stories are, or where my sales have been at, I lose a lot of that. And so I don't get to find those little discoveries anymore, because it's like I'm just trying to plug away to here. And then it's like, this isn't turning out right. So I need to take a step back and remember why exactly I'm writing this. And then that little extra stuff will start to pop in once I start writing again.
And that the way you describe that is just on point, at least particularly for me as well as an indie author. The looking at sales can be discouraging some months, right? Some knowing that there's like this super long list of tasks that I need to do, not only to get a new book out, but just to maintain what I have, the social media, the emails, everything. It can feel overwhelming. But like you said, sometimes you just need to step back and be like, okay, no, that's okay. This stuff is in support of my original dream to write, share stories, get this creative flow through my mind. So, how often do you feel like the oppression of tasks prevent you from being creative? Do you find that it's happening frequently?
I tend to find that it happens frequently, especially when I've had a pretty bad couple of months. And
Mm,
it also depends on how my mental health is too. Which, like, I struggle with some mental health stuff, and it's like I don't talk about it a lot, but it does affect the way that I write and the way that I go about things, because then it starts to seep in that it's like, oh, here's your sales or lack of sales, or here's your marketing that isn't working. And it's just all those little nitpicky things. And so for me, writing has always been like a coping mechanism. But when you make writing something that you love, like let me start over. When you take writing and you take that coping mechanism and you try to, like, I don't want to say profit off of it, but you want to use it as a jumping spot to share with other people, it can be really hard when people don't pick it up, or don't accept it sometimes. And so you kind of have to step back and have to separate it again and be like, okay, this story, like, I know, or I feel like it will do well, but I need to give it its time, and I need to separate all the different pieces together from each other. Because that's the big thing that I've noticed, like being an author, is that there are so many puzzle pieces to, like, you have to market, you have to um, edit, you have to do all these things, you have to do all these connecting. And it's like, you have to remember what's the center, what is the reason.
that I think is kind of the crux of the whole problem of so much, right? So as indie authors, I mean,
Yeah.
we could go into numerous details about what's not necessarily expected but required for, not to mention, an actually successful indie author self who is that is their business, versus someone perhaps like us who still has other responsibilities. We don't
Yeah.
get to do this full time, even though that would be our preference. Is separating the business from the creativity in whatever way is necessary, whether that's having a separate space for when you do the marketing and the money, that you're doing the
Yeah.
finances for, versus where you sit, the things you listen to, the environment you're in. Trying to separate that can really help you remember, oh no, this is joyful. This is an amazing creative experience, and to get you into that space. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. However, I want to point something out. I've been wildly impressed with you with your social media game, right? You are so consistent. then you create these amazing like swag options, and they go in and out, right? Of sometimes you have them,
Yeah.
sometimes you don't have them in stock, but the creativity around just building a brand for yourself and your books is amazing. I look at myself, I'm like, well, I've written a few books, and I haven't even created a bookmark, right? Like I haven't even done that. I think that's like first level indie author, and I still haven't done it, right? But you
Yeah.
are coming up with these amazing ideas. Whether or not they're working is kind of a different question, right? But the fact
Yeah.
that you're finding the drive, being creative with your content, with your intellectual property, and just putting it out there is amazing. So how do you do that? Do you organize that? Do you spend creative thought on, external to books, the property that you want to use to identify yourself in your books? How do you do that?
So what I usually do, like when it comes to like bookmarks and other things, is I'm one of those people that it's like if I have a book, I want kind of like a book swag box. I want a bookmark that matches. I
Hmm.
want to like have something else that would match the story. And so I just kind of take elements from the stories or like the aesthetic, and I kind of put it all together. And when I first started, I will admit I did really jump way farther than I needed to. Um because I still have a lot of it, but I enjoyed it because it's like I get to create these things, and I'm a very creative person to begin with. Like I am always constantly making stuff with my hands and crafting and just I guess combining everything together. I enjoy it, and then I have other people that it's like when like if I've done a few, for example, I've done a few in-person events, and I'll have my books and then I'll give them a bookmark to match. And people always get excited because they're surprised by it. And it's just something that like I enjoy to doing. And to me, it probably sounds silly, but to me, it makes it feel like the story gets to last a little bit longer. Because I mean, you only have like the writing process for like a certain amount of time and then the editing. And then when the book is over, it's over, but sometimes it's like, well, I don't want it to be over yet. So it's like, let me make these bookmarks or these other little things that will match the story. Let me throw in all these aesthetic videos just to kind of keep it alive, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. It brings out the joy of writing, and for
Yeah.
you specifically. Now, I can't speak to that being helpful for me, although I haven't tried. So
Yeah.
maybe I ought to try, right? But the fact that it works for you, any author listening or anybody who has this passion for this story, keeping it alive in whatever way. Some people put it in the form of perhaps marketing videos. They
Yeah.
create these really amazing videos with music and images, or maybe they record themselves. That is like over my head. But that's keeping the story alive. Your little figurines, your cards, your bookmarks, it's just amazing to be like, how did you even think of that? Like, it's just so
Yeah.
creative, the things that you come up with. And do you create those things yourself most of the time?
Most of the time I have, and I've kind of dabbled into a couple of little other things because there's a lot of stuff that it's like I want to do this, but I've got to start with what I have. But I've mostly used I usually I usually use like Photoshop or something. Like for example, the symbols for my Hollow series, I created those using Photoshop, and then I went into Canva and I designed like I haven't printed them yet, but I have um nope not notebooks, bookmarks designed for the different types of magic in the series. And then I kind of did the same thing with um my one of my a couple of my standalones that I have. I've taken like little elements like parts of like the cover, or I know one of my books I have a map. I took the map and I kind of put the title over it. And so I usually use Photoshop or Canva to create things and like digitally. But some of the stuff, like I've dabbled a little bit in doing resin crafts. And so I'm just like, okay, I think I went outside one time and I was like, let me see if I can find like any leaves that would match this character in this book and like put it in there. And I'm just constantly thinking of ways that's like, how can I bring like this character to life or this element to life? And I'm like, let me see if I can put it in this little craft area or this craft area. And then I'm like, okay, if I can make it, then, the story keeps going.
Absolutely. And I like that you keep saying keeping the story alive, right? Because
Yeah.
when you think about the reasons of writing, okay, there are people that write to market. They can still
Yeah.
love their stories, and that's great. If that's how you want to approach authoring, excellent. That's amazing. But there are many of us who are very close to these stories, this system, the things that we've created. And sometimes thinking out of the box, like the way you're describing, brings you back to, oh, that's right, I still love X character. I still love this world. I still want to be a part of it. My mind immediately goes to writing more books about the
Well, yeah,
story.
I mean, I will too.
Which
I'm
I
definitely
shouldn't,
like, oh, I could definitely continue this here and here. And I'm like, okay, wait a second.
but should I? Right. That's the question.
Yeah.
Is it doesn't mean I should, but how cool to hear the creative ways of bringing that back to life, and that just kind of like breathes life back into your creativity and into your writing. So, do you find that kind of skip hops to, because you're still working on the Hollow Shine series, right?
Yeah.
But you still come up with some of these things for Saviors of Tremna and the Maiden of Caldara, right? That's the right title.
Yeah. The Maiden of Caldera. Yeah.
Okay, I may have pronounced it. I've read those books, by the way. Those listening, they're
Okay.
amazing. You should read them. I haven't
Oh,
read
thank
Hollow
you.
Shine yet. I need to, and I want to. But so you're still creating things for those. Do you find that it helps you with your Hollow Shine writing, even though the stories aren't related at all?
Funny enough, like it does a little bit because for example, so I use KDP, so like right before the book is published, I get a author copy. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with these copies. And so I saw what I don't remember who the author was, but I saw on TikTok, she said that she'll take quotes from her books and put them on bookmarks. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And
Yeah.
so I've been working with that with my old copies and like ripping out pages. And as I'm reading through some of the quotes and stuff, I'm like, this kind of like scene where like the emotion of the scene, I'm like, this could really work for this in this series. And like, I mean, it's like completely different. Like for example, The Saviors of Tremna is a sci-fi, and I was looking at some of the stuff and I was like, the tension in this book matches the tension in a scene in Hollow Book 3. And it's just kind of interesting too, because you also get to see like how much your writing has grown, but also how I know a big thing is always what is my voice when I'm a writer. And as I'm looking through like the different quotes and things from the books, I'm like, okay, I can kind of see where like my voice is coming through. Like sometimes like it can be kind of intense, but it's like, but that's because it's in a like emotional scene. And it's just interesting to see that it's like I put these different characters from different genres in all these situations, but the overall arching theme or feeling of the story is like right there. So it's just interesting to see that it's like, okay, like this matches this, even though it's completely different.
Yeah, it's not that you're writing the same thing, right? Because there are very different
Yeah.
stories, scenes are different. But I think what you said, you capture the emotions, you capture the memories of those characters, their feelings and their emotions. And when you have similar experiences, it's just like, oh, that's right. Right. Like it just brings back this feels good, right? This feels right. And I'm feeling successful as I'm creating, which a sales aside is the more important part. Are
Yeah.
you feeling successful? Are you feeling creative and proud of the work that you're putting out? I just to speak to the business side, because that is a whole another topic. We could talk about that for a very long time about marketing, and I do talk to people about it. But your ability to market doesn't match your ability, the stories that you create, the ability to write. And I think sometimes that's where we get confused, right? Where we start to feel
Yeah.
frustrated when we're not getting sales. And you mentioned this, right? When you're not seeing a
Yeah.
lot of interactions, it's not because people don't like the story, it's because people haven't seen it, right? There's billions of
Yeah.
people in the world, and billions of people still haven't seen them, right? They haven't even had an opportunity
Yeah.
to pick up your book. And sometimes we just have to remember that. And that can help us with the creativity. I said, that's right. These people just haven't seen my books yet. They can't pass judgment because they haven't seen it. So we just get in our heads.
Yeah. There's a lot of getting in my head going on. But yeah, I like what you said. Like that's exactly how I feel. That sometimes I'm like, oh, my success as like the business side correlates with my writing. But I'm also like, I'm still fairly new to this. I'm only a couple years in, and I'm still, still trying to grow my reader base, trying to figure out who my reader base is. But I get excited though, because the few people that have read my books have said really good things about them. And it's not like, oh, like pat myself on the back, like egotistical. It's just like they've said, I've seen how much your writing has grown in this time. And I get excited about that. And I'm like, okay, I'm making progress. Like I'm doing good. And there are some days where I'm like, well, if 6 people only read my book, then that's fine. 6 people liked it. But I think what it boils down to is that it's like, do I like the book? I'm writing it for a reason. Do I enjoy it? Do I like it? And sometimes at the end of the day, that you're like, you know what? The business side might not be great, but I'm enjoying everything that I'm creating, and that's what counts.
Right, and that is what counts. To be fair, your books are amazing. I'll go ahead and toot your horn because I know you're not you're modest and you do. Your books are great. They're amazing. The
Oh,
two
thank
that I
you.
have read, I haven't read the novella or Hollow like I mentioned, but The Saviors of Tremna was really fun. Definitely not a concept that I would have even thought of myself. Too scared to write science fiction like that. I don't know. I doubt myself. And then the Maiden
I've Yeah.
of Caldara. Caldara, is that how you pronounce it? You just said it.
It's pronounced Caldera, but the way
Caldera.
that it's spelled, some people pronounce it differently.
Well, I spelled it
It's
wrong, but
okay.
it's great. I really enjoyed it. And I particularly loved the kind of, I can't even remember. I've read it. It was so long ago. I can't remember the name for them. The godlike people. What's the
Oh, the
name?
Magic Keepers.
Thank you. I was like,
Yeah.
there's a word for it. That there's art to kind of match you commission someone to do art, which is just so fun,
Yeah.
right? Because it brought life, and some of them were exactly how I imagined them. The way you describe it was like, oh yeah, it's totally what I saw. But it's fun that you've taken this really complicated story, put it in art, and then included that for your readers in the book. It's just really cool.
Yeah, that's what I really loved about that story, is like I really wanted it, because I was like, this is epic fantasy. You got to have the map, you got to have like the character drawings, and I actually wanted a lot more. But then I was like, okay, I got to scale it back. We'll just do the ones that we actually see in the book, because I would have gotten carried away and then been like, oh, they're not all actually in the book. But it's funny because with the Savers of Tremna, I'm a huge sci-fi person. I grew up watching Star Trek with my dad. We watched Stargate. And so a lot of those themes in those shows kind of bled into, well, I'll just write a sci-fi of my own. And that's kind of where that idea came from. So,
But they all have a
yeah.
story, right? there's
Yeah.
there's backstories to everything, but once again, it just comes back to the joy of the creativity, the joy of the process, which I think that we need to remember as often as possible when we're writing. um so for your current series, the plans that you have to, I mean, we are indie authors, we can choose to write what we want.
Yeah.
How do you plan to maintain that, remember that joy? Do you plan the books? I mean, you mentioned that you're a discovery writer, as am I. But do you
Yeah.
have plans for more stories, or do you just kind of take them as they come, just kind of pick whatever ideas pop into your head at any moment?
So when I first started writing, I was like, since I started with sci-fi, I was like, I'll write a sci-fi, then a fantasy, a sci-fi and a fantasy. And so after the Maiden of Caldera, I was like, okay, let's get into this fantasy. And I started, or excuse me, this sci-fi. And I started writing this one book, and I was like, I'm just really not into the sci-fi thing right now. I was like, this just isn't really hitting. And I have this huge filing cabinet. It's just full of stories that's like, some of them are like one sentence long, and then some of them I've got several pages worth of stuff that I've just written down. And I came across Hollow, which I had thought of years ago, and I was like, you know what, this feels good, I'm going to write this. So I just kind of, with the story ideas, I just kind of take it where it ends up leading me. It's for example, my novella that's out right now, I wrote that in between Hollow book 1 and 2, because I was like, oh, I had written this. It was for a class, and we had to write a 250-word story. And so I did that, and I was like, I can totally expand this. And then it became the novella. And so I kind of just let the creative juices flow where I want to go. I will say with Hollow, though, I have the consistent story, but every time I finish a book, I always take a break from it and focus on something else. That way I can kind of have a reprieve from the story and then go back to it.
That's probably really, I try to do the same thing for however long, set it aside. Some people, people who write rapidly say they wait a week. I wait a couple months usually. Just like, I'm just going to set that aside and then I come back to it with
Yeah.
fresh eyes. Um, but then you can come at it with a fresh perspective, and the joy of the writing comes back as you're reading it, because you're like, oh, that's right. I remember this as
Yeah.
I'm reading it. How fun. I really enjoy this. And then there's parts that you don't remember at all.
Yeah, I've been there. I'm like, oh, that happened. I totally forgot.
Oh yeah, that was that. You're like, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, you can't help but think that. Just like, I didn't think
Yeah.
that I had that in me, but there it is.
Yeah. I've also
Which
had points where it's been like I've written something and I'm like, I don't know how this is going to work out in the next like scene or the next book. But then it's like I get there and I'm like, oh, I can perfectly explain this away. And I'm like, I didn't even know I could do that.
then that is capturing the feeling of what it should be to create, to be part of the journey, to just really enjoy the writing aspects of it. And using that as a reminder can springboard you into whatever objectives, whatever else you are working on. So for you, given your experience, you've been publishing for a couple of years now, almost 3 years, like time's going so fast.
Oh yeah.
What advice do you have for people who have been, maybe they're stuck in a story, or maybe they're feeling bogged down by life, by responsibilities? What recommendations do you have for capturing that creative spirit again and bringing the story to life?
Probably what I would say is take a step back, take a little bit of a break and kind of reevaluate and then figure out, is it the story aspect that's bogging me down? Is it trying to market, or even is it trying to figure out whether I want to go trad or indie? And then once you kind of figure that out, what I try to do is like, okay, once I figure out what the problem is, it's like, are these things that are these things in my control? Like, can I fix them? Can I work on them? And if I can't, it's like, well, that's kind of out of my hands right now. So what I should do is I should focus on what I'm passionate about at that moment. And what it boils down to is like, okay, am I do I write because I want to write, or do I write to market, or do I write because I want to make the big bucks and things like that? But I would say, the biggest thing is just take a step back, kind of reevaluate everything. And I actually recently I kind of took a step back and I was like, okay, what am I bogged down about? And I kind of looked at it and I was like, you know what? I'm going to set this aside and I'm just going to work on writing. All that stuff will come later. Like, my books have a very long shelf life. They're going to be there for a really long time. If I want to work on this story right now, I can get to all that stuff later. I'm going to have plenty of time.
That is very helpful, honestly. Like, you just saying that is like a breath of fresh air, because I have recently been feeling like my website, my email, if I want to build a business, I got to try to sell more books and get into
Yeah.
ads and play around with it, X and X and X and X. But what you said there is amazing. Your book has a pretty long shelf life, as in forever, technically.
Yeah.
So you've got some time to come back to that, come back to the marketing. It puts it in perspective and makes you feel a little bit less like it's a race, because it's not
Yeah.
a race.
Yeah. That's what I try to tell myself, because I find that I'm usually in a race with myself, that it's
Mm,
like everybody says build the backlog, so I got to build the backlog, and
mhm.
it's like I I have little ones. This backlog, I do write fast for the time that I have, but I'm like, this backlog ain't gonna be that big. Like,
Yeah, and hearing things like, there's the 20 books to 50K, having a backlist of 20 books. It's like, well, that's gonna be about 8 years away for me.
yeah.
Minimal, probably more,
Yeah.
possibly 10. Now, that's far away. For some people, it's not that far, and good for them.
Yeah.
But sometimes you do what you need to. Life comes and you try to you integrate your writing into your life as best as you can. And they need to have like a symbiotic relationship where it just kind of works together as best as possible. But that's right. As long as you're enjoying it, I think that's the most important part.
Yeah.
But well,
And
very good. We could probably talk for hours about this, but we are running short on time. So you've got some exciting things that you can share. Tell us where we can find more information about you, about your books, and what else is going on.
so I am on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram under author Mackenzie Friel. I have a website, authormackenziefriel.com. Probably the best way to look at all my stuff is I have a link tree, which is the same thing, Linktree, author Mackenzie Friel. That's where you can check out my books, my websites. I do have a podcast where I am reading chapters of my books. It's kind of my version of audiobooks. And I always tell people that if you're interested in seeing what I'm working on, I do have a novella out that's short that I'm like, if you want to, take a gander, look at that. I do have another novella that's coming out soon. And I also have a newsletter that has a freebie to it. So usually my novellas that are being published are old newsletter freebies. I try to kind of cycle one or two throughout the year. So if you don't subscribe to the newsletter, then you got to pay for the novellas when they come out. But I'm hoping that once I have enough that I can put them all in a collection for those that like to read in paperback. So
That would be amazing. So take advantage of that. Subscribe.
yes. Yes.
Jump in while you can, people. Well, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.